One of the fastest ways that leaders unintentionally damage culture on their team is by delaying having difficult feedback conversations. And it does not happen overnight. It starts to slowly creep in. My name is Shareefa Amari, founder of Amari and Associates, and I work with leaders who are navigating complex organizational challenges. And this is one that we see crop up all the time. Essentially, it does not matter what industry you're in. It does not matter the size of your organization. If you have people that work at your organization and you have leaders in charge of leading teams of people, this topic is for you. So I want you to think about the last time that you knew you needed to have a difficult feedback conversation, but you intentionally waited. There was a reason that you gave yourself. If you have time, think about what that reason was, because I would be willing to bet that it fell into one of three categories. You framed it to yourself as either protective, you framed it to yourself as rational, or you framed it to yourself as thoughtful. And I'm going to explain what I mean here in just a second. The thing is, when we delay having difficult feedback conversations, it's not because we don't care. It absolutely does not come from indifference. It actually comes from caring quite a bit. And in my experience, it comes from wanting to either protect or preserve the relationship with that person. You don't want to give the feedback at the cost of the relationship. You may be framing it as rational in terms of, well, I need more data points. I want to make sure that this is a systemic issue. I want to make sure that this is not just a one-off, so I'm going to wait to gather more intel before I choose to speak to this person. Or maybe you're just being very thoughtful in terms of, I know everything this person has on their plate right now. I know everything that's going on. I don't want to derail their day, so I need to find the perfect time to give them this feedback. And then often it gets delayed so long it never actually happens. And this is where the tension comes in. Because even when we as leaders have the best of intentions, the dynamic on your team starts to change when clarity through feedback is delayed. Because if people aren't getting clear expectations from you, the leader, on whether or not their behavior is effective or ineffective, because remember, the purpose of feedback is either to reinforce positive behaviors or to redirect behaviors that are not as effective into behaviors that will bring positive results. That's the goal of feedback. And if people aren't getting it, the standards are going to start to get blurred, expectations are going to start to loosen, and people are going to start filling in the gaps on their own because the leader is not giving them direction. And that is where the hidden cost of the delayed feedback starts to creep in and have an impact on your culture. So I want us to start thinking today about what might change if we as leaders focused less on the discomfort that the tension brings of giving that difficult feedback, and whether or not the cost of waiting to have the conversation, potentially at the cost of you as the leader, your long-term credibility, is actually worth it. So we see here short-term comfort and long-term credibility. And the tension between the two is obvious, right? If we delay a difficult feedback conversation, we absolutely feel better in the moment because we don't have to have the conversation. So that's a problem for future me. But you have to remember that credibility with your team is built through consistent patterns, and people pay attention. I once heard somebody say that people are highly attuned social creatures, and they are. They pay attention. They absolutely notice what gets addressed through feedback and what gets avoided. And over time, that's what becomes the pattern. So think about this. If one behavior is addressed in one person on the team, but the same behavior is ignored in another, what message might that send to your team, and how might that impact your team's trust? Logically, when similar situations are handled differently, it doesn't just create confusion, although that is definitely a byproduct. It also starts to chip away at the team's confidence in their leader, aka you. And then people begin to question whether or not the standards are solid. Are they flexible? Is this situation dependent? Is this person dependent? Like, what do we really have going on here? And they're going to start to solve the puzzle in their own minds. So in the moment, delaying the feedback, it might feel completely harmless. But while we as leaders are waiting, our team is already forming conclusions and, key point here, adjusting their own behavior based on what they believe the pattern is, right? What they believe it is. And that's the tension. What feels like thoughtful restraint to us can actually feel like inconsistency to our team. So when we as leaders delay having this feedback conversation, we're not just managing one singular moment in time, we're actually influencing a pattern. And patterns are what shape culture. So let's take a look at what this could potentially cost us. So we've got 3 hidden costs of waiting broken down into 3 categories. So let's start at the behavioral level. I think we can all agree that if something goes unaddressed, it rarely, if ever, corrects itself, right? Best case scenario, the behavior continues. Worst case scenario, the behavior starts to amplify and spread throughout the team. Either way, if something doesn't get addressed, at a minimum, it's going to continue. And if it continues, it begins to become part of how things are done. And once that happens, you're no longer dealing with a singular instance, you're dealing with a pattern. Second place it shows up is relational. When similar situations are handled differently, again, like we talked about in the last slide, people notice that. And when inconsistency is observed, a team's confidence in their leader starts to shift and they start questioning whether or not their leader is consistent or fair. And, pro tip, you never want your people questioning whether or not you're consistent or fair. Those are 2 hallmarks of great leadership. And if your team is questioning that, it's a whole other conversation that we need to have. So we got to make sure that we don't allow that to happen through our delivery mechanisms of feedback. So when that confidence in their leader shifts, people begin to change the way that they bring concerns forward to their leader, or they may choose to not speak up at all. And in my experience, when people lack confidence in their leader, they either are going to hold back and not say anything at all to the leader, or they're going to escalate sideways. And so they are going to talk about the things that they need to bring forward as concerns, but they're not going to talk about them with their leader. They're going to talk about them sideways with people on their teams. Neither of those things are healthy patterns. And clarity of expectations don't just collapse in an instant, right? They just start to move a little bit each day based on what people are seeing, what they're experiencing, maybe what they're hearing from the escalation sideways from others, and what was once clearly expected now starts to become feeling more situational. And that right there is where performance, accountability, and engagement all start to become uneven on your team. And it's not because your team members don't care. Same way that it's that you're not giving the feedback because you don't care. Your team members aren't performing like this because they don't care. In this case, they are not performing because expectations are not as clear as they once were. And this is not just Shareefa saying this. Like, if you go and look at Gallup's most recent engagement reporting, it shows that clarity of expectations remains the strongest predictor of employee engagement, period. So when you as the leader are delaying these feedback conversations, the clarity around expectations is going to weaken, right? They're not getting the feedback, their expectations aren't clear, engagement is going to follow suit. So rather than keeping it purely theoretical, let's look at how this might show up in a team. So let's say that you have a high performer who is exhibiting low respect in your weekly meetings. And this performer, they are top tier. They are bringing in production, they are closing deals, whatever it is that you at your organization do, this person is a very high performer on your team and they are valuable to you. But in meetings, they are being dismissive. They are talking over other people. They are redirecting the conversation to be about them. And when certain people speak up, they are making gestures, eye rolls, sighs, things of that nature to let other people know that they're not quite interested in what those other folks have to say. And you, as the leader, of course, have noticed it, but you have consciously decided to wait. And in this instance, the reason you've decided to wait is because it is a high performer. So we all know that when we give feedback to high performers, they want receipts, they want documentation, they want to know exactly when and where it happened, all of those things. So you say to yourself, I'm going to be rational about this, I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to compile a whole list of things that I need to address with this person so that when they ask for receipts, I have them, right? So you're also secretly hoping that it corrects itself, but promise you it won't. Better to get ahead of it than to be behind it, I promise. So let's just assume that you wait 6 weeks to have this conversation. Let's talk through what might change in your team dynamics over the 6 weeks. So most commonly, people are going to start to disengage, right? They're going to be in the meeting, they will be physically present, or they will be on the Zoom or Teams call, but they're not going to engage, they're not going to participate, they're not going to speak up because they've seen how this high performer is acting and they don't want to be caught on the other end of it. Especially when they have realized that you as the leader have chosen, for whatever reason, not to correct it. And also, they're going to make up the reason. Like, they're going to come up with a scenario for why they think you haven't addressed it, and that is going to become the truth in their mind. And that is the thing about not addressing behavior. People create their own narratives around it. I mean, you could also end up in a scenario where you've got other high performers in the room and they don't take kindly to what's going on. And so because of that, you're starting to get some head-to-head combat in these meetings, so to speak, which would create a whole other set of unique challenges. And we could talk about how to de-escalate conflict in another video. But essentially what ends up happening is we are no longer just dealing with one person's behavior. Now we're actually dealing with how the team has started to adapt to this challenge in the room. And so by the time this conversation happens 6 weeks later, in this example, I think we can all agree that it would have been easier to fix the behavior of the high performer early on versus dismantling the pattern on the team that has formed around this person's behavior. And that is really where waiting becomes a risk, because when you delay having the conversation, it is the team who ends up absorbing that tension. And if waiting to have the conversation shifts the tension to your team, how do we as leaders decide when is it time to step in? So I want to take us to these 3 framing questions that helps us kind of break down logically, objectively, how we should think through these scenarios. The first question you should ask yourself is, what behavior am I normalizing if I don't address this behavior in a timely manner? Because the thing about silence is it does not stay neutral. Silence speaks volumes. And with silence, you as the leader don't have a way to impact what people are believing in terms of why you have chosen to stay quiet. They are going to fill in those gaps, and that is going to send a loud signal to your team. The second question you should ask yourself is, what standard am I setting as a leader right now? If I don't address this behavior through timely feedback, what might start to become acceptable on my team as a result? How might it damage my team or my company's culture? What might the trickle-down effect be? And third, who ultimately pays for the cost of my decision if I delay having this difficult feedback conversation? If I am, as the leader, am not paying that full cost, the team is absolutely absorbing the remainder of that balance in real time. And that's where the shift in how we reframe our reaction to having these difficult conversations really needs to come in. The overarching question should become, am I delaying giving this feedback for a specific reason that makes strategic sense? Or am I delaying in a reactive manner? And is the cost worth it? And once you reframe that for yourself, it begins to become a lot easier to step into these feedback conversations sooner because you're strategically weighing the cost of your inaction versus your action. And it helps reframe our thinking as leaders to become more team-focused and less self-focused on our own comfort. So I'll close with this. Avoiding difficult feedback conversations is not going to dismantle your culture overnight, but it is going to start to shape it through patterns and signals that you are sending. And leadership can never, as a leader, you're never going to eliminate discomfort altogether, simply not possible. But leadership is about deciding whether or not you as the leader briefly carry said discomfort, or if you allow your team to carry it short term, maybe longer term, or maybe even indefinitely if you choose not to address the issue. And just to go back to what we talked about in the first slide, culture is not shaped by intention alone. It's shaped by what leaders consistently address and what they don't. And clarity around expectations is what's going to keep your culture strong. It's going to sustain individual and team performance over time. Even with the best of intentions, the dynamic changes when clarity through feedback is delayed. If you are interested in practical leadership insights like this, consider subscribing. New videos will be posted weekly. Thanks.